Good afternoon. I'm Ron Leibowitz, president of Brandeis, and my wife Jessica and I are delighted to host this webinar today, co-host. We're excited to welcome back to Brandeis, at least virtually, Natan Sharansky, hero of the Soviet Jewry movement and former chair of Israel's Jewish Agency, and also to introduce you as co-author historian Gil Troy. We're all looking forward to hearing more about their new book, Never Alone, Prison Politics and My People, and their invaluable insights on Israel's relationship with American Jewry, anti-Semitism on college campuses, and more. As some of you may already know, Natan received an honorary degree of Humane Letters from Brandeis in 1992, and the following September joined Brandeis as a visiting professor for 3 years. He has dedicated his life to the Jewish people. As a dissident in the Soviet Union, Natan fought for the freedom of Jews to leave the Soviet Union and spent 9 years in Soviet prisons. On his release from the Soviet Union, due in part to hard work of the worldwide Jewish community, Natan made Aliyah to Israel, eventually spending 9 years in Israeli politics with the goal of helping his fellow Soviet Jews make a new life in Israel. Natan established the Israel Be'aliyah Party in order to accelerate the integration of Russian Jews, and he served in 4 successive Israeli governments as minister and deputy prime minister. After leaving politics in 2009, Natan became the chairman of the executive of the Jewish Agency for Israel, a position he held for another 9 years. In July 2019, he became chair of the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy. Natan has received many awards and accolades over the years, including the Congressional Medal of Freedom. We are honored to have him return virtually today. I also have the honor of welcoming Gil Troy, who is Natan's co-author. Gil is a distinguished scholar in North American history at McGill University. He is currently living in Jerusalem. Dr. Troy is an acclaimed American presidential historian, having authored 9 books on the American presidency. He is also a leading Zionist activist. His latest book, The Zionist Ideas, Visions for the Jewish Homeland, Then, Now, Tomorrow, was a 2019 Jewish Book Award finalist. He was recently designated an Allgemeiner J100, one of the top 100 people positively influencing Jewish life. Dr. Troy has been interviewed on major North American TV and radio networks. He has published essays in the American, Canadian, and Israeli media, and writes a monthly column, Secret Lives, for the Daily Beast, putting current events in historical perspective, as well as a weekly column for the Jerusalem Post. We are grateful Gil is able to join us to share his insights and knowledge. I'd now like to introduce University Professor Jonathan D. Sarna, Schusterman Center Director, and Dr. Shirley Idelson, Director and Associate Professor in the Hornstein Jewish Professional Leadership Program, who will lead our discussion with Natan and Gil. Welcome, everyone.
Well, thank you. And Natan, I also want to welcome you back to Brandeis. As the president pointed out, your mishpacha, your family here. And I well remember when you really were on the campus with your wife. And it's marvelous that you're joining us with my good friend, the celebrated American historian, Professor Gil Troy. You tell us here in Never Alone that the stories, the ideas, the values, and the humor are yours, and the magnificent readable prose is Gil's. So he's kind of Aaron to your Moses. And I can report that it is a fabulous collaboration. I do want to mention that your publisher is also a distinguished Brandeis alumnus, Peter Usnas, formerly a Washington Post correspondent, and best known as the founder of the distinguished public affairs imprint. I think Peter is in the virtual audience, and we welcome you too. Now, our focus over the next 45 minutes or so is on the theme of American Jews and the state of Israel, and you talk a lot about that subject in Never Alone, but I'm going to ask both of you, Natan and Gil, if you can start by reflecting on the American election just finished How do you think this election is going to reshape the relationship between American Jews and the State of Israel? Natan?
Well, uh, thank you for inviting me. Thank you for having an opportunity to go back to almost my alma mater, Brandeis. Of course, my alma mater is Soviet prison, but Brandeis is the next close to this. And well, first of all, I'm glad that elections are behind us because till now I was asked every day for whom to vote, and I really didn't like this question. So it's much more easier what to do now. You know, if in our book a year ago, long before election, we are describing this impossible situation when Jews who have all the reasons not to like their president are not ready to thank him when he's doing something good for Israel. And on the other hand, it's absolutely impossible situation when Israeli government, which has serious reasons to like some steps of president, is not ready to criticize president when he deserves it. So thanks God, now we are after elections. That's the time to build back bridges. This feeling of many Israelis that American Jews are betraying the interests of the Jewish state when they are so much against Trump. And this feeling of many American liberal Jews that Israel is betraying Jewish values when it is expressing such a sympathy to President Trump. I hope it's all behind us. There's now the time for a moment to understand that the other side also had its case. And thanks God, we heard the first speech of President Biden. I like the speech very much. He said the most novel thing that I'll be the president of everybody. But simply we didn't hear such words for many years. So let's now think how, in fact, American Jewry and Israel, who have such a common interest, and all our book is about it, how we will rebuild our bridges and we'll work together. Gil? Yeah.
Gil, you're an expert on the presidency. What words of wisdom do you have on this election?
I think these days nobody's an expert. It's become quite a challenge talking about the American presidency, partially because things are so inflamed. And let me start with a hope, and I'll pick up on what Natan was saying about Joe Biden's speech, which is that our book came out in September, and we've been feeling quite irrelevant to the conversation, given the partisan passions, given the fact that everybody's all or nothing, 100% for Trump or 100% for Joe Biden. And to hear an American president speak really in the tradition of American presidents about decency, about unity, about dialogue, the hope is that people say, hey, maybe we should read this book because that's also many of our themes and many of the important values that Natan Sharansky has been fighting for since his unfortunate days in the Soviet Gulag. So that's the hope. The challenge would be for every one of us to start acknowledging complexity. I always like to quote my Rebbe, the New York Mayor, Ed Koch, who said, if you agree with me on 7 of 12 things, please vote for me. If you agree with me on 12 of 12 things, please see a psychiatrist. And if we can start a dialogue, let's say just in the American Jewish community, in which American Jews who voted for Biden are willing to say, you know what, if Hillary Clinton had won in 2016, we probably wouldn't have the Abraham Accords. We probably wouldn't have the growing pressure on Iran, which has cut off the spigot of money going to Hamas and Hezbollah. We probably wouldn't have the embassy in Jerusalem. What can we learn from the Trump years, even as we abhor Donald Trump? And on the right, those who are mourning Trump's loss, and indeed he did seem to lose, if they can acknowledge the decency that we're hearing, the call for unity, and say, you know what, that was really missing in the last 4 years, then we can at least start a dialogue which is based on A, truth, and B, complexity. So that would be my challenge. And finally, my fear, so I had, hope, a challenge, and a fear. My fear is that the branding, the partisan branding has become so intense that even with Joe Biden's lovely calls for unity, even with a turn that, while that might make a difference in the transition, in the buildup, I fear that within the American Jewish community, there's a lot of anger by American Jews who are pro-Biden against the Trumpists, and an unwillingness to kind of see the complexity. And there's obviously a lot of anger by the Trump people saying, "Oh, these American Jews, they're traitors." And the call in the book is to see past that and to start acknowledging the complexity and the dimensionalities Natan was saying.
Over to you, Shirley.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan, and thank you, Ron. And I want to begin saying to Natan and Gil first, I just want to echo what Jonathan was saying about the book. It really is fascinating. It is a great read, and you cover a lot of territory. And our hope now is to get to as many of the book's topics as we can. A number of those topics relate to divisions of different kinds within the Jewish people. And one of those divisions you address in the chapter on what you call the Kotel fiasco, namely the collapse of that compromise on which, Natan, you worked so hard, that was meant to find a way for women to pray as equals at Jerusalem's Western Wall, and also for Reform, Conservative, and other Jews to be able to hold egalitarian services there. I know many wonder if there is any hope for that prayer space to still be created, but my question for you now is, why did that compromise that you crafted collapse? And what does the collapse tell us about Israel diaspora relations in general, looking past, but also looking forward, and perhaps more particularly about Prime Minister Netanyahu?
Well, really, it was a very critical moment in my relations with my great friend and great leader, Bibi Netanyahu. It was really the moment of big crisis and conflict, but it was also the moment of big hopes and crisis after this in relations between liberal American Jewry and the government of Israel. And we in our book show the complexity, show that in fact there were very strong arguments to blame Bibi and the government. On the other hand, there were very serious feelings of disappointment on the side of Israeli government and Bibi Netanyahu about some positions of American Jewry. Now, you have to understand, the idea was not simple that some women will be able to pray. The idea is that every Jew should feel that he or she can come to Israel together with their community, together with their rabbis, together with their prayers, and feel at home. And the most sacred place for Jews of all the world, national religious headquarters. And what's interesting, it was Bibi who called me and said, "I can't see anymore these pictures of violence. Can't you try to bring all the sides to the negotiation table?" And 4 years of negotiations, Prime Minister saved really these negotiations a number of times. And one of the big achievements, which I was very proud of, that for the first time we had normal, good, positive, trusting relations between the leaders of non-Orthodox Judaism in America and the Prime Minister. And the compromise was reached, a very important compromise. I believe that sooner or later, I hope sooner, it will be implemented. But at some moment when Bibi Netanyahu started feeling that his coalition is in danger, that maybe he's taking too big risk for the sake of these liberal Jews who are not really voting for what I'm voting. And he said, "No, I cannot really take this risk. I'll better wait." And he made step. He said, "We'll freeze for the time being. We'll freeze this compromise." The moment he said it, all the trust which was built was destroyed. So it's no doubt it's a big retreat. On the other hand, I propose to read this book also carefully about this moment, because each time when we show the considerations on one side, we immediately show what were the problems on the other side. For us, for continuing our dialogue, for continuing our journey together, it's very important to understand what are the doubts and what are the feelings and what are the pains of the other side.
Thank you.
Natan and I had actually just started working together on this book, and I should say, working with him was just a tremendous privilege because it really was a co-authorship. And I want to say how moving it is to hear both Jonathan Sarna and Shirley Idelson, whom I admire so much, speak so kindly about the book. So I want to thank both of you and Mr. President for hosting us tonight. So at the height of the controversy, I'm sitting there, and Natan is extraordinary. To this day, he starts his workday at I think 5:30 a.m. I usually finish mine at 4 a.m. So the book was being covered a good 22 and a half hours a day. And I said to him at the height of the controversy, during this week of so much pain, where I could see his sense of betrayal, I said, "Who's your enemy?" And I was expecting him to say the Haredim or Bibi, and he said arrogance. And it was a really interesting answer, both because it really showed that this is, in all the years we've now been working together very closely for 3 years, I've never heard him have a vengeful thought. I've never heard him gossip about people. It's really, that's just not in his character. But more than that, he was really getting to the character of the age. And we've gotten so arrogant on both sides. And now let me make a little bit of trouble as someone who was completely on board with Natan and with the reform and conservative movements wanting a compromise, wanting an egalitarian pathway. Let's use the historian's favorite text, context. And let me throw out two different curveballs. One, the very week that controversy is happening, and we're reading in Yedioth Ahronot, the Israeli tabloid, and all these other Israeli newspapers, rupture, divorce, $1 billion coming from the United States are going to go up in smoke. My son comes back from the shuk, from Machane Yehuda, and he says, "Abba, I couldn't get a seat. I couldn't find a place to drink or eat that night." Machane Yehuda, of course, has become a very popular place on Thursday nights and Saturday nights for Jerusalemites. And I said, "Why?" knowing the answer. And he said, "Well, there were too many Americans." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Birthright." So at the very time that we're being told that we're losing the next generation of young people, that there's never been such a rupture, my son was seeing the tens of thousands of young people who were coming on the birthright trip. And so that's, again, one of the dances that we play between convergence and divergence. We see the good news and the bad news. And I'm the voluntary chair of the Education Committee of Birthright, and I'm going to inject some Brandeis content. I turned to our good friend, Len Sachs, and I said, "Give me the numbers. What do these Birthright participants experience about the Kotel? Do they come and see it through a gender lens? Do they come and see it, as so many rabbis do, through a conflict lens?" And we could find no difference a year ago, 3 years ago, when it hit, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. The Kotel, the experience they experience at the Western Wall, continues to be the spiritual highlight, not just of their 10-day trip on Birthright, but of their lives. And it's very important for us as leaders to understand that sometimes we fall into a kind of leaders conversation. We fall into power struggles. And obviously we need to solve this problem. But we should also remember that we're not losing a whole generation. The generation is experiencing things on many different levels as well.
Thank you. Jonathan?
So maybe let's step back a moment and ask both of you, why do you think Israel has become so divisive in American Jewish circles? The Kotel is only one example. I remind you that our university's namesake, Louis Brandeis, he was deeply proud to be a Zionist. And I know both you, Natan, and you, Gil, are proud Zionists. So why do you think so many young American Jews now shrink from that term, and some actually oppose the state of Israel's very existence? Natan?
Well, there are many layers and many answers. Well, let's start from one or two, and then Gil will take the others. First of all, that was the great dream about the state of Israel, that suddenly that is the answer for thousands of prayers. That's our poor child, which becomes our great hope for American Jews and forever. I have to say that this Israel of my grandfather, some journalists are saying, it is all dream, because practically, if you say, it was very centralized, one party oriented, the curfew for Arabs who couldn't leave their places of living at night, when a very paternalistic approach to new immigrants and so on. So to compare today with the absolutely open economy, with no one party dictating any positions, with no paternalism, the attitude to new alim, and so on, it's a very different type of country. But then it was the period of great dream and hope, and the idea of national state at that moment in the world was very popular. Now, as a part of this dream was this dream about peace, and it seems that just now there'll be peace, and instead of this there is another war and another war and another war, and the idea of national state at this moment ideologically becomes very unpopular first in Europe, then in American universities, that why do you need national states and to fight for them? And so when the idea is not so popular, and you don't have a peace, so it's not all, you have all the time to justify to your friends why you're supporting the state, which only because it insists to be a Jewish state now brings us all these wars from the Middle East. And of course, our enemies who want destruction of Israel are very happy to use these moods and to strengthen this so-called new anti-Semitism that we write a lot about it. And suddenly you come to the stage when, as I first found it on the American universities in the 2003, there are some students who say, hi, for me as a liberal Jew, it will be better if Israel doesn't exist. Then I don't have to justify it. I don't have to defend it all the time. But the dream is as big as was. The reality is better. The way to peace is much more difficult. And there are many other reasons which maybe Gil can add.
Yeah, Gil, you wrote a book on Zionist ideas, so give us a sense. What's going on here?
So there's good news and bad news in that. Indeed, I even before I wrote the book, The Zionist Ideas, I wrote a kind of personal manifesto called Why I'm a Zionist. And I was literally told by someone who was a major philanthropist, he said, I'll support the book. I love the message, just change the title. And I've been told again and again that Zionism doesn't poll well. And I say, yeah, the American Revolution didn't poll well in 1776, even in certain parts of Boston. The feminist revolution wouldn't have polled very well before Betty Friedan launched the feminine mystique. Certainly the civil rights revolution wouldn't have polled well. We learn from polls, but we can't be tied by them. And but I did also find out through the Zionist ideas, and we're finding out through this book, when you invite people into a conversation about not Palestinians, not BDS, not Bibi, not the headaches and the headlines, but about who we are, who we could be. What does it mean to be a people? What does it mean, the message of our book now, Never Alone, to be a part of this extraordinary network? Their eyes light up. So part of it has to do with the way we ourselves have been framing the conversation. We, the leaders, we, the grown-ups, have been framing the conversation. And then indeed, as Natan said, look, first of all, going back to my previous answer, there's this overlap where the fundamental partisan division between Republican and Democrat, between Trump and Biden, is now also overlaid with the tensions over Israel. Once upon a time, we all worked together to keep Israel as a bipartisan value. And I think that actually was a gift not only to Israel, but to the United States of America. A healthy country needs issues on which left and right can agree. And then we go to the university and we see this artificial choice people have to make between universalism and particularism, between being a good Zionist and a good liberal. And so the other message of the book is, let's start crossing wires. Let's start building bridges. Let's not be either or thinkers. Let's not be all or nothing thinkers. Let's figure out ways to create a new synthesis that balances the two.
Over to you, Shirley.
Yeah, so let's stay on this theme of bridging divisions. I thought that one of the really interesting parts of the book was where you described two cultures with two very different survival strategies within the Jewish people. The Davidians, who are prepared to use brute force to protect Jewish sovereignty when necessary, and the Isaians, who place human rights for Jews and non-Jews front and center. And you repeatedly cite the need for greater bridge building, like you were just speaking about, between these groups, both within Israel and internationally. So my question is, in this polarized world, can you point to any signs of such bridge building that might begin to grow in the coming decade? And how can we invest in this important work of bridge building within the Jewish people to bridge the divides that we're experiencing?
Well, first of all, it's very important to understand that each of us, every person, and definitely every Jew, we are both Davidians and Messiahs. We are ready to fight against our enemies, and we want to see the world in peace and respecting human rights. But the crude facts of life sometimes dictate you the priorities. And what do half of Jews of the world, approximately 43%, chose to live in Jewish state in the Middle East as a democratic country with all this surrounding. And half, 42%, chose to live in the United States of America, where you are a minority in a liberal state. Whether you want or not, but agenda in Israel dictates the first thing you have to defend physically your state. And that's what one after another, every generation accepts it as the number one priority. Number one priority for survival for American Jewry is to make sure that society will remain liberal in order we as a minority can survive and prosper in this surrounding. So that's why in our agenda, we first of all have to think how physically to protect Israel. Immediately after this, we are thinking about how to make sure that it's a democratic state and respects all the citizens. American Jewry, of course, have to think how to make sure that America will continue to be liberal, respecting human rights. There is no place for anti-Semitism or other hatred. And after this, maybe not immediately after this, but after this, yes, we want to protect Israel. And so, division is almost built in. But what helps to overcome it? The fact that both sides, and I saw it again and again, being in the government or being in Jewish agency or being in prison. So it again and again, how all the Jews in the end want to continue this journey of Jewish people through centuries. And what today is happening, where is the hope? Both sides understand that they need the other. American Jews understood like 20 years ago that for strengthening their own identity, they need Israel. Israel understands more and more that even when we are a startup nation, even when we are so successful, our existence is questioned, and there is no better ally for us than world Jewry. And without world Jewry, we simply will become one more Middle Eastern country, ordinary country, which has no passion for this unique role in history which wants to play. And this understanding that we need one another comes to the projects like Birthrights or Masa or many other, or for example, the convention to fight global anti-Semitism, which I initiated 20 years ago, and where suddenly there is a very broad platform for cooperating between those on the left and those who are on the right who are fighting against our mutual enemies. But these are the beginning of understanding how we need the other side in order to succeed on our mutual journey. You?
And one of the ironies we talk about is that very recognition of interdependence and of need is one of the things that sometimes raises the stakes and raises the tension. Because when American Jewry decides, hey, wait a minute, we need Israeli Jewry and we need Israel as a model to help us build Jewish identity, and then the Kotel, the Western Wall, doesn't fit with our more egalitarian approach to Judaism, they go, how dare you? There's been no change in the Kotel for 50 years since the 67 war, right? There was gender segregation quite quickly thereafter. But because we're so much closer, because so many more of us are visiting, because we have this intimacy, we know this from couple psychology too, there sometimes is greater frustration. And Natan says that in the with cellmates too, you also get more frustrated because you're living on top of one another. And similarly, Israelis who have that recognition that Natan's mentioning of, whoa, we need these people in the fight against delegitimization, then get really frustrated if some betray us. And it becomes words like betrayal because we needed you. So that's one dimension of it. Two other things, if I may. One is that this conversation about Isaiah and Davidian is actually a nice example of the collaboration that we experienced, because Natan for a very long time had been talking about two different survival strategies. What he was just explaining, that American Jews have to survive as a minority in a liberal sea, and Israeli Jews have to survive as a Jewish majority in a quite hostile sea. And I've been for a long time talking about this Davidian and Isaiah difference. And when we put it together, we were able to kind of create a kind of three-dimensional analysis. And that was kind of the fun of the book. Literally, there are sentences where I can see he gave half, I gave half, and it all worked together, which doesn't mean we didn't argue a lot. But we argued about style. We never argued about ideology. We were actually on remarkably the same page. And that goes to the core of your question. First, let's talk about Soviet Jewry, right? We're still young enough that many of us were on the side of the barricades fighting for the freedom of people like Natan Sharansky. And that was a remarkable moment of unity. And one of the lessons of the book is that it was a moment of unity, but not unanimity. That there were people from the left and people from the right. There were Orthodox, there were secular. Natan says how he sometimes had to smuggle the same document to two different organizations on two different sides of Fifth Avenue because they weren't talking to one another. And that's absurd, but also wonderful, because we were able to have our diversity, have, if I can echo the late Jonathan Sachs, the dignity of difference, but also have a common goal. And so we see it there. Unfortunately, our enemies remind us when the Pittsburgh massacre occurs, when Israel's attacked in Gaza and elsewhere. That is a thing that often, a phenomenon that often unites us. And as Natan says, all these identity building projects, Birthright, Masa, so many initiatives that didn't exist 10, 15, 20 years ago, these are points of unity. And what we have to do is, Jews have always been very good at being countercultural. And we also have a very rich tradition of machloket, of division. Specifically now in the United States of America, which hopefully is healing, but is still bleeding. Let's use our tradition, not only to heal our own community, but to show a model of how to talk to one another, even if we disagree.
Thank you.
So let's move in another direction. This morning's paper is full of discussion that now the peace process will be restarted by President-elect Biden. And I think one of the things that may surprise readers of Never Alone is the emphasis on democracy, not just for Israelis, but for Palestinians. And I wonder whether you can talk a bit about your vision for the future and how democracy plays into it. What kind of peace agreements would you, both of you, like to see Israel pursue with its neighbors at this time?
Well, I believe that democracy and peace are very deeply, almost intimately connected. And that's I took from my experience the struggle in the Soviet Union, and then, of course, living in the Middle East. You see, the difference between democracies and dictatorships is that in democracy, leaders depend on the people. Just now we saw, if people don't like their leaders, they replace them. In dictatorships, leaders don't depend on their people. People depend on the leaders. And the challenge for dictator is how to keep his people under control. And in order to keep his people under control, they need external enemies. And that is why I was absolutely against Oslo Agreement. And today we speak about Oslo Agreement, this book, even in more strong terms, how it wasn't, in fact, it was betrayal of the interests of Palestinian people. Why? Because the idea of Oslo Agreement was, we'll take dictator from Tunis, we'll bring him to the Middle East, we say to Palestinians, whether you want or not, he will be your leader because, and I quote our leader then, because he as a dictator will be able to defeat our enemies, Hamas and others, better than we can do it. He will not be restricted, I quote our leaders, he will not be restricted by free press, Supreme Court, human rights organizations. And that's why he being loyal to us, because we are giving him the state. We'll give him a lot of money in order he can run his own army. It will be, we'll take public army money of Palestinians and give him personal to Arafat in order he will deliver us peace. 3 weeks after signing agreement, I wrote my first article against it. I said, we will make sure that he'll be strong dictator in order to deliver us peace, he as a dictator will need us as enemies, and he'll make sure that his people, new generation of Palestinians, will hate us even more, because that is his way to continue running his own people. So that was my position then. It didn't change. I always was saying that the real peace will come to the Middle East from bottom up, and that we have to make sure it is in our interest that Palestinians will not live in the refugee camps, that Palestinians will have modern economy, that they have modern education system, and the elections which are made in the conditions of free society will bring the leaders who are interested to have peace with us. Then compromise can be on both sides. That's why what is good in these days, what's happening good is, look, let's tell the truth. Our partners today are also dictators. They're not Democrats. But at least it comes from the bottom up, the people to people. From all our peace with Jordan and Egypt, there was not one serious mutual business didn't come. Not any act wanted to come and to play concerts in Israel, because the public opinion was absolutely against, not speaking about Palestinians. Here, for the first time, we have a real normalization and a good desire to build peace coming from the bottom up. And I hope that in the end, it will help also to involve Palestinians in building normal civil society. And our role and role of the free world is to help Palestinians to build such a society.
Gil?
2002, I opened up this thing called a newspaper, the Wall Street Journal. And back in those days, we used to read newspapers. And I read a column by Natan Sharansky, who's serving as a minister in the Israeli government, at the height of the wave of Palestinian terror. And buses are blowing up, and cafes are blowing up, and the awful Seder massacre had just occurred. And at the height of this fight that the Palestinians had against the Oslo peace process, Natan Sharansky writes an article saying that we should now be thinking about factories to give Palestinians jobs, and how to build civil society, prosperity, and democracy. And I said, wait a minute, this guy, we're told again and again, is a right-winger. That's not right or left. And Natan calls himself, in this case, basically a party of one, because by calling for democracy for the Palestinians and saying then we can have a possibility for peace, there were people from the right who were saying, hey, wait a minute, we're not going to give up any territory. And what we're saying is no, that you need to have a vision of peace where in a democracy, you aren't going to declare war on your fellow neighbors because your leaders are working for your good ends. Now, of course, we're not naive, and we know democracy won't be created overnight. But we want to say, and we've actually seen it, that all these bottom-up initiatives work. And I think when we're talking on Brandeis University campus, we should also say that that whole initiative of the Palestinian national movement, not the Palestinians, but the Palestinian national movement, to fight against normalization, to boycott Israel, to demonize Israel, to delegitimize Israel, means that the most normal, the most banal, the most benign, the most peaceful initiative between often left-wing Israelis and Palestinians somehow becomes unkosher, unholy. And what we're seeing in the excitement that Israelis are feeling when they read about a Bahraini singer who learned Hebrew months ago and wants not just to visit Tel Aviv, but Yerushalayim Gam Ken, and the excitement about the businesses is that if we have people-to-people contact, that's how we can build peace, even if they don't quite yet get to democracy. And that's the vision of the book. And we wrote this book long before we realized that there'd be an Abraham Accords, but that's why it's so important now that those of us from the left, those of us who believe in democracy, those of us who supported Joe Biden say, hey, wait a minute, let's learn those lessons. Let's see how we move ahead, because the old peace process train has been a bit of a train wreck, and we shouldn't just go back to the same mistakes that stopped things before.
Over to you, Shirley.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to ask, I think we're going to ask one more question and then open it up to questions coming from our listeners. But I want to ask a question about anti-Semitism, and it's actually a two-part question. And I want to acknowledge as I ask it that today we mark the anniversary of Kristallnacht, that date, November 9th and 10th in 1938, when Jews were attacked across Germany by the Nazis. So it's again a two-part question about anti-Semitism. So one, you discuss in the book anti-Semitism on campus, and I'm wondering if you can share with all of us the aspects of campus anti-Semitism that you consider to be most concerning, and also what you think might be the antidote to that campus anti-Semitism. In other words, how the Jewish community and others can respond. And then the second part of the question is, I wonder if you could also share your view on the rise in violent anti-Semitism that we're witnessing from the right, certainly here in the United States, but around the world, that's really quite violent, coming often in the form of white nationalism. And is the antidote for that similar to the antidote for anti-Semitism that we're seeing on campus, or is it very different? Natan?
Okay, well, I visited in the last 20 years more than 100 universities. And there are many stories, and some of them we are telling in this book. I'll stick only to one. In Brown University, 4 years ago, I am speaking together with Michael Douglas about Jewish identity, how each of us discovered Jewish identity and what it means for us and so on. And just when our lecture is declared, we are going to speak, there is demonstration against Israel outside. And I decided, in spite of the warnings of the bodyguards, to go and to talk to them. I go out, I see a group of very nice young people, and it's not the first time that I face demonstrations. I also got a pie in my face once in articles. There were many conflicts. These people look like rather peaceful, and they stand with the slogans, Israel is an apartheid state, boycott Israel. And they come to one young girl and they say, you know, you're too young to know what was apartheid. I, as a friend of Mandela, Nelson Mandela, and I am the one who was international observer at the elections in South Africa. And I spent a lot of time in Soweto. Let me speak to you for 5 minutes and to tell what apartheid meant. And then I propose you and your friends together, we will discuss whether it can be connected to Israel or not. She looked at her ringleader, he gave her some sign, and she started shouting, we did not come here to talk to you. We came here to demand boycott Israel. And everyone started shouting. So I came back to the students who wanted to talk. That is one of the problems. There are some, this new anti-Semitism, the demonization of Israel is used again and again, double standard towards Israel, and less desire to discuss it, this canceling culture. And well, there are many other aspects and episodes, but I'll want to address what you said, what about the right-wing anti-Semitism. Of course, it is absolutely awful. And what happened in Pittsburgh is a reminder, well, of what was in Sharper with those who are shouting, we will not let Jews to replace us or so. So it's, and anti-Semitism on the right is also on the rise. The problem is that, and we speak about it in the book, the problem is that anti-Semitism on the right is very easy to identify, and everybody agrees. The anti-Semitism, the new anti-Semitism on the left, which comes in the way of demonization and the legitimization of Jewish state as a collective Jew, is much more difficult to see clearly. And I spent a lot of time explaining this connection. In this book, we speak a lot about how it is important to fight together anti-Semitism on the left and anti-Semitism on the right, and most important, that people on the left will fight anti-Semitism on the left, and people on the right will fight anti-Semitism on the right. It's much more difficult than to accuse one another. But it's very important. This type of hatred has to unite all of us.
Thank you. Gil?
We call anti-Semitism the most plastic hatred. And that's first we take our hats off to Robert Wistrich, the late great historian, who called anti-Semitism the longest hatred. But in addition to being this hatred of long standing, it's plastic in that it can be manipulated, it can be molded, and of course it's artificial and lethal. which is the plastic nature of it. And we see that it works for the left and it works for the right. It works for street thugs and it works for Islamicist terrorists. And on one hand, we joke, isn't it so kind at a time of great division? We finally found something for the far left and the far right to agree on. They hate Jews. But fundamentally, I not only echo what Natan says, which is the left must clean house on the left and the right must clean house on the right, because how foolish is it? Every time some Trumpian yells about campus anti-Semitism, nobody's listening. And every time some left-winger yells about white supremacist anti-Semitism, the right person the right people aren't listening. And at a time of division, we need to have very clear red lines against hatred against women, against African Americans, against all people, and we also have to unite on zero tolerance of hatred for Jews. And this silly, embarrassing debate about which is worse, which is more lethal, which is more toxic, left-wing anti-Semitism, right-wing anti-Semitism, anti-Semitism, zero debate, right? And zero tolerance for it. So we start with that. But it's also really important that we have what I like to call the jujitsu, J-E-W, that we take the negative and turn it into the positive. We don't build our Zionist identity or our Jewish identity only as anti-Semites or anti-Zionists. It's very important that we have a positive vision. It's very important that we get to core identity questions of who we are. We also call this, Pilates Judaism, Pilates Zionism. Let's strengthen our core. And once we actually strengthen our core, once we really have pride, once we have knowledge, once we have a sense of heritage, once we have a sense of identity, then when somebody comes after you, you take it very personally. And so I think we spend too much time focusing on how to fight the haters and not enough time how to build up our love for our past, our love for one another, our love for our ideals. And that's really the most effective way to fight. That if we have a very strong, united Jewish community with room to disagree, we can also say, okay, here's an issue on which we can fundamentally agree and work together and learn from one another how to fight. And you're right, the fight against left-wing anti-Semitism often requires paragraphs and paragraphs, and we end up spending a lot of time on the book, and it's because it's a more intellectual thing, and it's masquerading behind human rights talk and all kinds of things. The street thuggery we see at Charlottesville and elsewhere is sort of easier, and Jews are also more in the wake of the Shoah, more primed to see right-wing anti-Semitism. We have to see hatred wherever it comes, and we have to reach out to all those victims of hatred in America and hope that next year, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, we won't be going around and seeing so much pain on people's faces saying, the last 2 years have been really hard. Let's hope the next year, 2 years, 5 years, we'll say, you know what? We had a couple of bad years, but now things have turned around.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Dr. Shana Weiss. I'm the Associate Director of the Schusterman Center for Israel Studies here at Brandeis University. And I just, again, want to thank everyone who participated in this really excellent panel. I'm going to try in about 10 minutes ask and summarize some of the amazing questions we got from the audience, both beforehand and during the chat. And I want to start with one that came up a lot, and that is how to handle disagreements, right? And I got a sense from the chat about what people disagree about, right? We already talked about the Kotel. There's a lot of questions about settlements, about annexation, about a perceived rightward shift in the Israeli politics. Given that, you've been involved in these public disagreements, what do you think is the way that American Jews or other diaspora Jews can talk about Israeli policies they disagree with in the most productive way?
Okay, Gil, you start. I'll continue.
So I'll say two things. One is that putting things in context helps. So yes, it's very easy to talk about the rightward shift because indeed, certainly since the 1970s, there have been many more Israeli right-wing politicians in power than left-wing politicians. But that misses the LGBTQ story in Tel Aviv. It misses so many progressive things that are going on in Israel. It misses the broader context. So first of all, just being able to take our historical lens and pull it backwards and also see things in historical context helps us not deny the problems, but lower the rhetorical temperature. And it goes back to what I was saying at the beginning about complexity and honesty and truth and seeing different trends. That's the one thing. The second thing that I'll say is that it's really important that while we disagree, we also see what unites us. And what happens is, especially on university campuses, especially when you're trying to have a good Hillel program, is we always emphasize left versus right, settlements versus peace, et cetera, et cetera. Why don't we have the first half hour talking about, and this is what I do with my Zionist salons. We talk about Zionism. We read great Zionist thinkers. We talk about what does it mean to be a people. We talk about what does it mean to be never alone, to feel like you're never alone when you're part of this thing. And then we get to the disagreements. And that creates a different tonal model because we see, you know what? We agree on 80% and we can fight like heck over 20%.
Let me give one example. Just now it was mentioned in the audience, there is Peter Osnos, who is our publisher, who created public affairs. 45 years ago, he was journalist of Washington Post in Moscow. And when he was arrested and accused, he was mentioned as my accomplice. Why? Because he was really helping us to make sure that the world knows about our fate, Soviet Jews and other dissidents. And after this, we went to live our lives. He became very, very famous liberal publisher, and I became right-wing Israeli politician, or believed to be right. Practically in every conversation, including yesterday, we are debating, and he convinces me how the period of Trump was awful, and I mentioned to him, but there were some very good things that he did. And then we speak about Biden, and I tell him that I really love the first speech of Biden. And because each of us knows exactly where our heart is, where our ideals are, what we think really about Israel and about human rights. So that's why we are ready to debate and to disagree. And then always you find out that that there are many things on which we can agree. Real important thing is to first to accept that if you accept that your partners or your opponents or those people who belong to the absolutely opposite side from you, that they have the same deep belief in the fate of Jewish people, in the fate of Israel, and in the importance of human rights. And as the result, you are ready to listen and to try not to agree, but to understand the other position. And then you always will be together. You will always be together because there is something very deep which unites us. And that's very important through all this. The problem today is cancel culture. That simply, if you disagree with me, you don't exist for me. You're on the wrong side of history. And the moment we stop talking to one another, the moment we are only on our Facebook, only with those who agree with us, there is no way not only to build the unity, but to continue our journey together. And that's something what our book talks about it again and again and again.
Thank you. I want to ask a question that we've touched about before, but that's about some positive trends that we do see, right? Both Gil and Natan, you talked about birthright, other identity building programs. We had a question come in about the possible role of the arts in building bridges. And, if you had, let's say, an unlimited budget, right? What kind of programs would you create to deepen those and to work on these core relationships that you both hold so dear?
Well, look, there are many programs that we were dealing with, and we discussed them in the book. And if I'll say about one program which is needed today, which is lacking, I think we need curriculum in Jewish schools about Jewish civilization, about the history of Jewish people. That we need that student in Tel Aviv and student in Brandeis and the student in ultra-Orthodox community and from Reform Synagogue will have one. There'll be many additional things on which they disagree or they have different histories. But if we are one people, there must be our history, our philosophy, our one story which we all learn. And twinning of schools was something that I was dealing a lot. And It started from 2 schools in Israel, Moscow, and then turned into 600 schools almost immediately. The desire of different schools, Jewish schools, to talk to one another together, to exchange appearances, it was unbelievable. We need to make it systematic. We need to have our the course on the history and philosophy of Jewish people, which unites us.
Natan didn't have an unlimited budget, but he had a $350 million annual budget in the Jewish Agency. And one of the extraordinary things he did, and this is we talk about in the third part of the book, is he took this luxury liner that had always been about Aliyah, about after 1948, always about settling oppressed Jews, and it was always about an Aliyah of the oppressed, an Aliyah, an immigration that's a response to anti-Semitism, and said, no, wait a minute. We live in a world of an Aliyah of choice. We live in a world where most Jews, thank God, live in democracies now. And they're not oppressed Jews like they were in Ethiopia, in the Soviet Union, in Germany in the past, and elsewhere. So now we have to have a new language. And he launched a whole series of identity building programs. And again, as I said earlier with the Zionist ideas, I was trying to invite people into a multidimensional conversation. And the great writer Leon Wieseltier says that our great crime is ignorance, that we are the spoiled brats of Jewish history, that we in American Jewry are the most educated, the most literate, the freest, most prosperous Jewish community in history. And yet, as Natan's saying, we don't know our Aleph Bet. We don't know our basics. And so the challenge is Hebrew, and the challenge is Tanakh, and the challenge is Zionism, not only political Zionism, what I call identity Zionism. Zionism is a key into a conversation about who we are and who we can be, and how, both as individuals and as a nation. And that's really the excitement that once upon a time we felt like we were completely prophets in a wilderness, that no one was listening to us. And part of the story of the book is, again, two people from very different worlds. I was in the clouds studying in academia to be a historian, while Natan Sharansky was suffering in the Gulag. We came from very different worlds, and yet we agree on this identity platform. We agree on this peoplehood platform. We agree on this vision of a positive Jewish identity, because ultimately we are free to put it aside. We're also free to see the complexity, to link liberalism and nationalism, universalism and particularism, our Jewish pride and our American democratic pride, Israeli pride. And what a great opportunity. And we feel very lucky. We feel very blessed. And we want to thank you for all your amazing questions, all your amazing preparation, and all the good that you do every single day to bring a thoughtful, critical, multidimensional conversation about Israel back to the table and back to the universities where it belongs. And I love the university. I'm a case of arrested development. I got to the university and never left. So I don't bash the university. I look at them as tremendous platforms for opportunity, for learning, for growth, ideologically, and of course, most important, intellectually.
So thank you all so much. We could obviously continue this conversation for a long time, but I'm going to pass it back to our president to offer us some concluding words.
Yeah, those were my words also. We could probably continue this conversation for a long time, and we should. First and foremost, by reading Never Alone and continuing the conversation. But I want to thank Natan, Gil, Jonathan, Shirley, Shana, the Schusterman Center for this wonderful opportunity for us to delve into what is a highly complex issue, but one that we're going to wrestle with and we're going to deal with this new president-elect coming in and with all of the things that we heard here today. So thank you. I encourage everyone to read Never Alone and continue the conversation. Thanks once again.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you.